Hello, you absolute legends, and welcome back to Creating. As some of you might have noticed, I make videos about 3D printing. I believe that 3D printing is in the hobbyist stage of its life cycle, much like computing was in the 70s when electronics enthusiasts were trying to bring home computing solutions that would suit everyone. Now, it's not quite there yet when anyone can just pick up a printer and print whatever they want. But in the next few decades, it definitely would be. And then it would be used for... you know what it would be used for. The question I get most often from my friends and family is what exactly is 3D printing? You can make things out of plastic, but how exactly does a 3D printer work? So in this video, we'd cover how 3D printing actually works and a few different types of home 3D printing solutions, and also what to look out for if you're planning to buy your first 3D printer. Before we start, I'd like to bring to your attention that on this channel, I try to do everything from scratch in an effort to bring you original content, be it the graphics, the animations, the prints, or even the music. So if you've been enjoying my content, hit a like for the algorithm and subscribe to not miss out future content. Considering how high-tech it sounds, 3D printing is a relatively simple process to understand. We are all familiar with normal 2D printers like an inkjet printer or a laser printer. They print things on a piece of paper in 2 dimensions. Now, if we were to replace this paper with a build plate, a 3D printer does the exact same thing but over and over again over the same build plate. Imagine that the ink has a thickness, let's say 0.1 mm. A 3D printer would put down one layer of that ink on the build plate. The print is now 0.1 mm high. And then the printer would put down another layer on top of the previous one. The print is now 0.2 mm high. Similarly, if you keep printing your next layer on top of your previous one, you can build an entire object out of it. That's all 3D printing is about. Now, there are many different types of 3D printing. It's even possible to 3D print metal these days in an industrial setup. But for home 3D printing under a budget of around $1,000 or so, there are mainly 2 solutions: FDM 3D printing and Resin 3D printing. Both of these have their own sets of advantages and disadvantages, but before we get into them, let's see what each of them is about. FDM stands for filament deposition modeling. These types of machines take in filament and an extruder then melts the filament and deposits it onto the build surface. The gold standard for home FDM 3D printers is Prusa, and I have one right here. It's a Prusa Mark 3S. It's technically a clone but made to the exact specifications using high quality components like the original Rambo board, a Meanwell power supply, and Bondtech gears. The other option we have is Resin 3D printing, and Resin 3D printing can further be of a few different types, but DLP is the most popular one amongst them. DLP stands for Digital Light Processing. A DLP printer does not take filament for 3D printing. It takes UV curable resin. The liquid resin is poured into a vat with a transparent bottom. The vat sits on top of an LCD screen. The build plate moves down into the vat, and the screen would then project the current layer onto the resin, which would harden being UV sensitive and stick to the build plate. This here is a DLP 3D printer, my Creality Halot Sky. I got it only recently and have been enjoying it a lot. There is also SLA 3D printing, which also takes resin, and they look very similar to DLP printers but have a few different characteristics. Instead of an LCD screen, it has a laser pointer that moves and outlines the entire layer. That has an effect on the print time and also the characteristics of the final printed object. But I have not seen any SLA printers under $1,000 or so, and I would mostly be discussing DLP printers in this video. Now the big question: FDM versus resin. Which one do you want? This is where most people would start counting the benefits of one over the other, and the discussion becomes all about specs and layer heights and resolutions and whatnot. But I'd give you a very simple answer straight away. What do you want to do with it? If you're looking to make some engineering prototypes for your new project, FDM printers offer varying filaments with very different properties, and generally speaking, the prints are stronger and more robust. If that's your main objective, FDM is the way to go. And at similar prices, FDM printers would also offer bigger print volumes than DLP. If you're looking to make miniatures or small models where minute details are crucial, DLP printers offer more resolution and detail. If that's where your interest lies, you'd have to get a resin printer. FDM just wouldn't compare. Now, if you're just a hobbyist with some money burning a hole in your pocket and you don't know what you want, go for FDM, and here's why. Resin is toxic. Resin printing is a lot of hassle. It produces fumes while printing. You always need to have gloves and a mask on when operating a resin printer. You also need to wash and cure your resin prints in order to fully process them and make them safe to touch. Although water washable resins do exist, but those that need isopropyl alcohol to wash are still the most common ones. The same is not true for FDM 3D printers. The filaments themselves are non-toxic. Most common filaments like PLA and PETG do not produce fumes while printing and are safe to print without any protective equipment. Few PLA filaments are also advertised as food safe, although I have no way to test them myself. You may or may not have realized by now, but with FDM 3D printers, all you need is the printer itself and the filaments. The only additional cost is the occasional repair work you'd need to do. With resin printers, however, the cost of a washing and curing machine, isopropyl alcohol, and protective gear should also be taken into account. There is also multi-material 3D printing, which is only possible with FDM 3D printers. I have a Prusa MMU2 unit that I built myself, and I have gotten some really lovely prints out of it. But it's a headache to get good multi-material prints, and I really wouldn't take it as a big point in favor of FDM 3D printing. Because the typical person with a 3D printer just doesn't want that headache. I think I have ripped on resin printers enough for the time being. Now a few plus points for them. Calibration. For resin printers, the calibration is really simple. When I got my FDM printer, I had a few failed prints in the beginning, but that has not been the case with my resin printer. Quality. Now here is a comparison between a print that I did on my resin printer and another that I did on my FDM printer. I dialed the settings such that it would take similar times on both. You can clearly see that the FDM printer cannot match the details of a resin print. I would also point out that this is nowhere close to the best my resin printer can churn out, but this is the best my FDM printer can do. Another thing that I definitely should mention is that if I wanted to print multiple instances of the same model at the same time, on a DLP printer, the print time would not increase even a little bit, but the print time would essentially double for my FDM printer with each new model. So there you have it, folks. To put my experience with the two types of 3D printers succinctly, I'd say that FDM printing is more of an art form while DLP printing is more of a science. I hope that has made some things clear for you regarding 3D printing. And if you liked this video, you know what to do. If you didn't, the other one is fine. Please subscribe. I'm nearing my 1000 subscriber mark very quickly, and then my first requirement for monetization would be complete. And as always, just keep building.